In the days, first days when Dylan died, in absolute complete shock, I was contacted by a family liaison officer and said that somebody from the health board would be contacting us and that it was incredibly serious and they were considering gross negligence manslaughter. And I remember being sort of quite shocked, but because I was assured that I think after the second day somebody from the health board was meant to contact us, I was expecting that and it didn't materialise. So there was a lot of me chasing the coroner's office, me chasing the health board, just wanting to speak to someone, wanting that contact, that reassurance that, it would be dealt with seriously. And nobody contacted me, despite me giving my number to people. And then on the 8th day after Dylan's death, the investigating officer contacted us and I said, I just want the full picture as to what exactly has happened. We wanted to meet with the health board and we were told no, to leave them to it, and they would do everything that they needed. They'd speak to staff. I said that I was concerned, that I wanted statements from people while things were still fresh in their minds. And so we waited and waited. They asked us for a timeline of events, which we gave them. At the time, my husband didn't feel able to put pen to paper, but I was able to, get information from him and produce a timeline. Looking back now, I'm not quite sure why I wrote it in the way that I did, but I didn't differentiate between all the individual staff that saw Dylan, because we never envisaged at that point that staff would remain unidentified. And in hindsight, had I have had somebody to think about us and our well-being and the potential pitfalls that may occur during the investigation, that would have been really helpful. But we didn't. Then we got the report and there were so many surprises. I was just shocked that there seemed to be, from our perspective, little to no probing with staff involved. There were also observations taken, Dylan's final observations that I'd had sight of, that weren't included. Almost all of the questions that I'd asked at later dates were added in, but a couple were not included, and one of them was, how can you ensure impartiality? So we contacted them immediately. I drafted my concerns about the report, and when I did, somebody else from Putting Things Right, which is just such an ironic name really, because how can you put anything right for poor Dylan who lost his life? They were copied into an email chain. And so from there, it just felt like a real battle to get information and to get answers about this unidentified staff member. There were a couple of other things that just didn't quite add up, and one of them was an unidentified staff member that took Dylan's father Lawrence's phone call a couple of days later. I wanted him to go back, but Lawrence said, he might catch strep A. It was at the time of the strep A outbreak. So he decided to call the open access number, and the person that answered the phone, for a long time we were told that that person couldn't be identified either, and then they'd said that this person had been identified and they had given a statement, but it was only a few lines and they couldn't really recall whether or not they definitely spoke to him. And when we got it much later on, that statement had been written 5 days after Dylan died. And when we read it, this nurse had been very honest, and at inquest, she was the only person that we felt really showed compassion in a meaningful way. And that was really appreciated. And I just sort of, put my hand on my chest and sort of mouth, thank you. From that point onwards, from our perspective, the person we were in communication with regularly, the tone changed and they became even more guarded and quite combative at times, and we just felt it wasn't necessary. They were softly spoken and they were prompt with their communication, but quite cold and very matter of fact. What would have been really helpful is to say, goodness, I'm a mother too. I can only try and imagine, we haven't done any of these things intentionally. Rest assured, why don't you meet with us face to face and we'll go through in person your concerns. It wasn't until my husband said, I'm going to do a public appeal. And then a couple of days later, I had an unexpected phone call from the person I'd been communicating with saying, yes, okay, we will give you the forensic-like investigation that you should have had. And we found a way now of interrogating the swipe system. So we received the final report and we were just really angry. It seemed like it had abruptly been sent to us when there's potentially really serious allegation of staff, unidentified, believed at the time to be a surgeon or at least a senior doctor, that had played the most profound role of all in reassuring Dylan's father that Dylan wasn't suffering from a potentially life-threatening illness, but a self-resolving one. And I'm not saying that there are things perhaps that he did say that Lawrence had not remembered clearly, but he was adamant that he'd felt very reassured. It felt like they were almost gaslighting Lawrence. So I sought out a meeting with the Chief Executive Officer and the Executive Director of Nursing. They agreed to a further investigation and they assured us it would be undertaken by different people. And it went from the short list of potentials being 2 unidentified male that saw Dylan to 12. Lawrence remained keen to see them or at least have anonymised visual identification of them. And he felt confident he could at least eliminate, if not identify, this person. But we were denied this on the basis that the person wore a face mask and there was, in their own words, a risk of misidentification. We're not looking for a scapegoat, it's not a witch hunt, but we just want as full a picture as possible as to what exactly happened that night and his thinking behind his review of Dylan. According to the investigating officer, Lawrence wasn't given the correct safety netting advice on discharge. He was only given the flu aspect and not the abdominal pain. The sheet he should have been given did say that if the pain doesn't go with Calpol Nurofen and it still persists after 24 hours, to come back, that was a red flag. But Lawrence never got that advice. I was assured that we've addressed that really quickly. We've developed a generic safety netting sheet. I said, great, could I see it please? I was keen to be involved, from a parental point of view. And I was reassured it'll be in the final report, don't worry. It never made it to the final report and I only got sight of it over a year after Dylan died, after consistently asking to see it. And when I saw it, I was absolutely astonished. It was like an extra dagger in my heart. It was so disjointed, but the one that just astonished me more than anything was one of the red flags, and the wording said, if your child has ongoing abdominal pain. And I just thought, how on earth can you expect parents and carers to determine what ongoing means? One might be 72 hours, one might be 24, one could be a week. And according to you, the health board, the investigating officer, that was a root cause of Dylan's death. His father wasn't told if the abdominal pain persists, over 24 hours to 48 hours. So that was, just one example of many. The lack of learning, there are so many examples I could give. Unfortunately, there is an element of blame, I suppose, somewhere, however people, dress things up, especially when legal are involved. I just think it's a shame that we felt that we had no alternative but to report them to regulatory bodies because we didn't get all those answers and because we didn't have assurances of reflections and because we, moreover, didn't have that opportunity to meet with them face to face and reassure them as well. Healing for all, that's a massive missed opportunity. Couple of years fighting for really basic things that should be done has compounded our distress so unnecessarily, and that will stay with Lawrence and I forever. It's done irreparable damage, and I want to make sure that people are not subject to these same behaviours and investigation failures in the future.